Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Beckwith, and what I want to talk about in this video is a report that came out, about a month ago. It's called, it's the Reuters Digital News Report 2025, and it talks all about the trends on how people are getting their news and what news, what fraction of the news is from mainstream media, and how people are distrusting mainstream media more and more, and they're going to different podcasters and YouTubers and TikTokers and other people. So the media landscape is definitely changing. And of course, one of the biggest threats that was pointed out in the risk report that I talked about recently, and there was another risk report about 6 months ago that came out. Disinformation, misinformation is a huge short-term risk, and it divided things into environmental risks, societal risks, misinformation, disinformation, other factors. So this is a very interesting news report that has just come out on digital media. It's by Reuters, the Reuters Institute, in collaboration with the University of Oxford in the UK. So let's have a look and see what it has to say. First, we'll look at the key findings, and then we'll look at the report. And of course, accurate news, realistic news is very important for a functioning society. Okay, so this is an article on the digital news report. Links will be in the description. So the overview and key findings of the 2025 Digital News Report, and this is from about a month ago, this article. So this report, I think it's their 14th report, so they've been doing it almost a decade and a half. We obviously have deep political and economic uncertainty, changing geopolitical alliances, going from a unipolar world of the U.S. running everything, which it was at the collapse of the Cold War, to a multipolar world. China is very, very rapidly on the rise. We have at least, we're going to a much more multipolar world, and then norms of behavior, international institutions are being weakened, etc. So they talk about those things. They also said not to mention climate breakdown, continuing destructive conflicts, wars around the world. So against this background, evidence-based and analytical journalism should be thriving, with newspapers flying off the shelves, broadcast media and web traffic booming. But as this report shows, the reality is very different. In most countries, we find traditional news media continuing to struggle to connect with much of the public. There's declining engagement, low trust, and stagnating digital subscriptions for mainstream traditional news media. There's an accelerating shift towards consumption of news via social media. Okay, I don't need to tell you this. You see this all around you if you're on social media. Video platforms also are getting much bigger. And that's diminishing the influence of institutional journalism. It's supercharging a fragmented alternative media environment containing an array of podcasters, YouTubers, TikTokers. Populist politicians around the world are increasingly able to bypass traditional journalism in favor of friendly partisan media, personalities and influencers who often get special access but rarely ask difficult questions. Many are implicated in spreading false narratives or worse. So this is becoming a huge issue. These trends are increasingly pronounced in the US under Trump, and also in parts of Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe. They're moving more slowly elsewhere, these trends, where news brands maintain a strong connection with audiences. So many countries, we have press freedom under threat. Alternative ecosystems offer opportunities to bring fresh perspectives, challenge repressive government. But at the same time, these changes may be contributing to rising political polarization, right? Two sides, neither talking to the other. and a coarsening debate. The level of debate, the protocols, etc., are all being squashed. There's a deep divide between the US and Europe, between conservatives and progressives everywhere, over the limits of free speech, right? Battle lines are drawn over the role of content moderation. Do we moderate or not? Do we fact check or not? These things are big questions in social media spaces. Okay, so this survey looks at emerging challenges in the forms of AI platforms and chatbots. Largest tech platforms integrate AI summaries and other news-related features. Publishers worry these could further reduce traffic flows to websites and apps. So the world is increasingly polarized, and it's increasingly populated by synthetic content and misinformation. All generations still prize trusted brands with a track record for accuracy, even if they don't use them as often as they once did. Okay, there's growing numbers of people who just shut off, right? Eventually, a lot of us are doing this, on a temporary basis. We just shut off and avoid the news for a while. So that's a big deal. Growing numbers of people are selectively and in some cases consistently avoiding the news. They look at the potential benefits, pros and cons of using new generative AI technologies to personalize content, make it feel more engaging to young people. They looked at the podcasting, video talk shows, bundling, etc. So this is the 14th edition. So they've been doing this digital news report for a while. So you can download the report here, and let's have a look at some of the details in the report. Okay, so this is the Reuters Institute Digital News Report, and we're just going to have a look at some selected things in here. Many different sponsors, many translated into many different languages. Okay, so they did YouGov surveys of many people across all different countries, and they looked at how the public gets their news, how different platforms, the changing landscape, how to engage audiences while avoiding overload. And they have market data on all different continents, all different countries, and so on. Okay, so 2024 was a super year of elections, an intense year for news coverage. It was marked by polarized battles over tradition and change. News publishers continued grappling with greater platform disruption and fragmentation, pressure on existing business models, and fraying connection with audiences. Okay, it used to be, everybody would get news from the same sources, from newspapers, mainstream sources, radio, television. So everybody would be operating on the same page from the same information. But now everything is completely fragmented, and there's a rise in attacks on free press worldwide occurring. So these shifts are happening. There's a continuing fall in engagement with traditional media sources like TV, print, and news websites. Dependence on social media, video platforms, and online aggregators is growing. The good news, overall trust in the news has remained stable for the third year in a row. It's about 40%. But there's two emerging themes. First is the rise of an alternative media ecosystem, YouTubers, TikTokers, and podcasters. Okay, there's evidence both in the US and several global majority countries where social media are widely used to access news. Alternative media voices often have a wide reach and appeal to audiences that news publishers have been keen to engage with, but the report also shows that when it comes to underlying sources of false or misleading information, online influencers and personalities are seen as the biggest threat worldwide, along with national politicians. Another emerging theme is that these AI chatbots are being used as a source of news for the first time. The numbers are still relatively small, but they're getting higher and higher, especially for young audience, so there'll be a lot of growth over the next few years. There's a delicate dance for news publishers attempting to understand how best to use AI in news, and that's becoming more complicated as audiences in most countries remain skeptical about the use of AI in news. Okay, so they collected data. They had 100,000 individual survey respondents from all different countries. They tried to get several thousand from each country, and then they analyzed it. Okay, so so here's some of the markets. So divided into Europe, the Americas, Asia Pacific, Africa. You can see different countries listed here. And look at this is internet penetration. Interestingly, look, it's 100% in Denmark, 96% in the UK. Many countries are, 90% plus. Norway, 99%, almost. So Norway and Denmark lead. And then you have, it's as low as Greece, 85%. Well, there's Bulgaria, 80%. There's an 83%. And if you go to Africa, it's really low in some countries. In the U.S., it's 93%. Canada, 94%. Some countries, most countries are approaching the 80 to 90% level here. Very high in Australia, Hong Kong, Japan. I thought it would be higher. Okay, so there's variation. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting data in here. So we'll look at some of the summary, some of the key findings, executive summary key findings. Okay, we're obviously having deep political and economic uncertainty, changing geopolitics, changing alliances, not to mention climate breakdown, continuing destructive conflicts around the world. Evidence-based and analytical journalism should be thriving, but the reality is very different. Traditional news media is struggling to connect with much of the public. There's declining engagement, low trust, stagnating digital subscriptions. There's an accelerating shift, as I mentioned, to consumption via social media and video platforms. So that's diminishing the influence of institutional journalism. It's supercharging a fragmented alternative media environment with an array of podcasters, YouTubers, and TikTokers. Populist politicians are increasingly able to bypass traditional journalism in favor of friendly partisan media personalities and influencers, and also by constantly sending out stuff, garbage or not, to their social media channels, and then the news picks it up. So we're in a different world. These trends are increasingly pronounced in the U.S. under Trump, but in other countries as well. Okay, so there's also growing numbers of people selectively and in some cases consistently avoiding the news. Okay, so some of these people, there could be new generative AI tech to personalize content, make it feel more engaging, to not overwhelm, but to inform people. Okay, so these are some of the key findings. Let's have a look at. So engagement of the public with traditional media sources like TV, print, and news websites continues to fall. Dependence on social media, video platforms, and online aggregators grows. Okay, social media news use was sharply up over the previous year. Personalities and influencers in some countries play a significant role in shaping the public debate. 1/5, 22% of the U.S. sample says they came across news or commentary from popular podcaster Joe Rogan in the week after the inauguration. Disproportionate number of young men. In France, there's a news creator, Hugo Travers, who's also at that 22% level for the under 35s via mostly YouTube and TikTok. Young influencers also play a significant role in many Asian countries like Thailand. So news use across online platforms continues to fragment. 6 online networks now reach more than 10% weekly of the public with news content, compared with just 2 of them a decade ago. About a third of the global sample use Facebook, 36%, YouTube 30% for news every week, Instagram 19%, WhatsApp 19%, TikTok 16%, and X 12%. Okay, the proportion consuming social video has grown from 52% in 2020 to 65% in 2025. Any video from 67% to 75%. News podcasting is reaching younger, better educated audiences. The U.S. has the highest proportion, about 15%, accessing one or more podcasts in the last week. Many of those are now filmed and distributed on YouTube and TikTok. Okay, so TikTok is the fastest growing social and video network, adding a further 4 percentage points across markets for news, 49% of the online sample in Thailand, 40% in Malaysia. Over half of the sample say they remain concerned about their ability to tell what's true from what's false when it comes to news online. Okay, it's high. Those numbers are the highest in Africa, the U.S., lowest levels, Western Europe. Online influencers and personalities are the biggest threat worldwide as sources of false and misleading information. And, there's AI chatbots and, people being skeptical. So let's have a look at the data. I mean, one good thing is that overall trust in the news is 40%. That's been stable for 3 years in a row. It's 4 points lower than it was at the height of the coronavirus pandemic. So it was 44%, now it's 40%. It's been 40% 3 years in a row. Traditional news losing influence. So this is proportion that used each as a source of news in the last week. So we've got TV. So this is 2013 to now, over the last 12 plus 13 years. 72% TV, down to 50%, drop of 22 percentage points. Online news sites, down 69% to 48%. And then we've got social and video networks have jumped from 27% to 54%, doubling basically in the last decade, passing traditional TV and traditional online news sites. This is a huge shift. Print down from 47% to 14%. Print is rapidly disappearing. News podcasts, 15%, more than radio, which is 13%. And AI news emerging is about 7%. So it's rapidly emerging. Okay, so things are shifting. This is by age group, young to older, the proportion that say each is their main source of news. So it goes from social media and video networks for the different ages, online news services, look how much low print, news podcasts, AI chatbots, and then TV news is still here, but mostly for the older crowd, right? The younger crowd are going to social media, not getting their stuff from TV. This is a proportion of people that saw each discussing or commenting on the news in the last week. Joe Rogan, disproportionate with younger men, 22% in the U.S. Tucker Carlson, so the far right commentators are just soaking up the people to watching, eyeballs on the screens. Joe Rogan, 22%, Tucker Carlson, 14%, Megyn Kelly, 14%, and then other ones here. Okay, so the landscape's definitely changed. This is a proportion that saw each discussing or commenting on the news. So this is Joe Rogan. The people who saw Joe Rogan, under 35, 29%, 35 plus, 20%. Males, predominantly male, 28%, female, 17%, and predominantly right-wing, but, across the spectrum. Fewer center, fewer left. And then Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, Brian Tyler Cohen is the left guy. Okay, and this is showing, this is a proportion that say social media is their main source of news in selected countries. Look how high it is in Brazil. This is the UK, 20%, USA right up here. Okay. Proportion that use TV as a source of news, it's dropping significantly across the board. Okay. Okay, so things are rapidly changing, and there's lots more detail. So this is proportion that used each network. So what social media platforms are we talking about? Well, Facebook is here. Was 36%. It's dropped a bit. I mean, they've really changed their algorithm to reduce news to 3% in feeds. You know, in Canada, you can't get mainstream news on your Facebook feed. They've wrecked it basically, so it's dropped. No surprise. YouTube's gone up 16% to 21%, steady growth. And there's other platforms. The green one is WhatsApp, and the purple one is Instagram, and then we've got X. You know, X is kind of flattened. This is TikTok, rapid rise. Blue Sky, you know, is very low, 1% up to 2%. Okay, many progressive people left X and moved to Blue Sky, but the proportions are still very low. Okay, so they talk, and then so they talk about all of these different things. Lots of data for each of the platforms and how they're used in different countries. This is well worth looking at, this report, if you want to understand how things have been shifting. And then they go by proportion that consider each a major mis or disinformation threat, all markets. You know, Facebook is half, TikTok 48%. You know, X is really high too. I mean, people trust some of these other platforms more. Okay, so it talks about media literacy, you know, trust in the news levels, proportion that trust most news most of the time. You know, you can see that it's dropped significantly over the last decade. This was a COVID bump here. You know, here's where we are, 35% overall trust. This is UK, Germany. So they break this out for different countries. And they talk about news avoidance. So the top reason, so there are times when many people just shut off and don't watch the news. The top reasons for news avoidance, 39% say the news has negative effects on moods. 31% say they're worn out by the amount of news, just inundated with too much news. 30% say there's too much coverage of conflict and war. 29% too much coverage of politics. 20% say, actually, there's nothing I can do with the information, so why bother watching it? Why bother staying informed? 18% say it leads to arguments I'd rather avoid. 18% says it doesn't feel relevant in my life. 9% say news is too hard to understand. Okay, so 40% is the average people. They often or sometimes avoid the news. And this shows how different. So it's highest in Bulgaria, it's highest in some of these countries. Canada, 40%. USA is 42%. Okay, so there's lots of interesting information here. They divided some of their stuff by different age groups and so on. Weekly use of AI chatbots for news, you know, in different countries and the different, so ChatGPT, proportion that use each AI chatbot for news in the last week, all markets, ChatGPT, 4%. And then you've got Google Gemini, Meta AI, Claude, Perplexity, one I use quite a bit, Snapchat, Microsoft Copilot. Okay, so those numbers are rising, but they're still relatively low. This is a description, so people that watch, proportion that say each is the first way they come across news in the morning, UK and US. This is 2016 to 2025. So TV, a big drop. Smartphone, people just wake up, turn on their smartphone. Numbers have just skyrocketed for smartphones. It's actually 58% with under 35s. This is the UK. This is the US. Okay. And then these other media, you know, computer is low, newspapers plummeting downwards. Okay. 1% in the US, 6% down to 1%. people, get up and read the newspaper. So deliveries are way down. So the media environment's changing. So it's important to understand, how it's changing. They go into a lot of statistics on how many people pay, and then there's international comparisons. They look at all different countries and compare. It's a 171-page report. So I just want to show you, this is some of the analysis by country and market. So I just want to show you some. So Europe, Americas. So I'm going to show you Canada's, but look at your own country. This is page 124. US is page 118. So 118 we'll look at first. 118. Okay, is right here. So countries. US, okay? Population, 342 million. Internet penetration, 93%. Let's just have a look. So this is the TV, radio, and print, weekly reach, offline and online. So 3 days per week or more. So Fox News leads, 32%. CNN next, local TV, ABC, and then the others down here. So you might be surprised at these numbers. This is TV, radio, and print. And then you can go online. CNN online leads. The sources of media, how it's changing. And again, print is just really disappearing. And devices. So this looks like a laptop or desktop, a tablet, and then a smartphone. I mean, look at smartphone usage, way up, right? Computer usage has dropped, and then tablets and smaller devices has increased. But smartphones, it's smartphones. They changed how we get our news. The trust score is only 30%, right? And the World Press Freedom Index score is actually not that high in the U.S., 57 over 180. And then the top social messaging and video networks where people are getting the news is all sitting there. And then Brazil, there is Canada. Okay, what does Canada say? Brazil, and then Canada. Here's Canada. So 39 million, 94% internet penetration. And you can see, CTV News, CBC News, Global News, CNN, and so on. This is English speaking, and then online, the breakdowns, and then French. Okay, the different French where people are getting their news. 14% pay for online news. And you can see the devices, smartphone gone way up, computer kind of coasting along, dropping a little bit, and tablets. Overall trust score, 39%. The global average, I think, is about 40%. And that's been constant in the last 3 years. So YouTube, 28% for news, for all 59%. Facebook, lower Instagram, X, Facebook Messenger, right? So all the breakdowns are there for all these different countries. So this is, I thought this was an interesting report that I wanted to basically cover. So it's open source. You can just download it yourself and have a look at it and see what's going on in your neck of the woods in the world. Keep this in mind. Where people are going for their news. And I'm on mostly just on YouTube, but there's other platforms. I was surprised at how low Blue Sky is, compared to it's having big growth, but it's still very, very low, just a very tiny chunk of the way news is distributed. Okay, well, thank you for listening. Please go to my website, paulbeckwith.net, and donate at PayPal to support my research and videos. Thanks again, and bye for now.